Welcome to the NYC Workforce Drop. I'm Greg Morris, the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. So excited that you've joined us here today, wherever you are. Where are you right now? We had a blizzard. It was, just think about it right now in New York City. Who would have thought we'd have an earthquake a while back? Now we're having blizzards. I mean, this is, and are you still shoveling out? Are you one of those people whose car is still filled with ice and snow? I'm thinking of you. If you are listening to this pod while you are shoveling right now, do me a favor, take it easy, watch your back, take some aspirin after. I'm guessing we're still going to be in the process of digging out for a while to come. And by the way, I'm guessing when this pod drops, some of the snow will have melted, so everything will be wet still and gray. And that makes every New Yorker thrilled, by the way. You remember all the times we said to ourselves, oh, there's no snow. What happened to all the snow? And now we have it, and we are miserable with all the snow. Welcome to New York, everyone. Listen, I want to say a couple things here before we dig into the drop. Thank you for making this time for us. This drop is important to us for a variety of reasons. This drop that is focused on Chris Watler, the Executive Vice President, the Center for Employment Opportunities, CEO, one of the nation's largest evidence-based reentry employment organizations. This conversation that we're going to dig into is about folks who are returning home from incarceration and the desire to ensure that they have stability and dignity, that there is a pathway to work. And what I think we're going to dig into here is we're going to dig into how it is that community stands up for those individuals, how it is that we know what our carceral system has done to individuals and to families, and how that needs to be rethought and reframed, and how it is that we need to ensure that our systems and structures are in place so that individuals who are finding their footing are able to live successfully in our city and reduce the likelihood of recidivism. Just a couple things. Chris is an extraordinarily talented individual. He is focused on systems alignment. He thinks about public safety and economic mobility. He is someone who has been championing his organization's work that has been focused on paid transitional employment upon release, structured work, coaching, retention supports, and increasingly pathways into credentialed, thriving careers. Listen, I think we're going to dig into this conversation from the perspective of someone who grew up in our city, how it is that they were impacted by their family's vision of justice and social justice, how it is that our city has changed, and how Chris has found his footing as a true champion of individuals who are folks we need to ensure have access to justice, support, and success. Ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled that you have joined us for this podcast with Chris Watler, Executive Vice President of the Center for Employment Opportunities. Chris, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on to the pod. Welcome. Are you excited to be part of the pod?
I am super excited. I've been waiting with bated breath for this, Greg. So thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled that you're here. You and I talk often, not often enough, probably, because I feel like I learn from you, and I feel like our sort of understanding of how program and policy matters, and how they intersect and sometimes how they collide, is something that comes up for us a lot in our conversations. Let's start this way. Did you imagine, as a young Chris, and I know you from telling stories about sometimes in the past, your life in the past. Did you imagine at this moment in your life, this is where you would be, in this role, doing this work?
Absolutely not.
Where did it begin? Yeah, like Where did you imagine you would be, and how did you work to this particular place?
Yeah, I like to say I grew up in Brooklyn in Crown Heights. My parents came to this country in the late 50s from Jamaica and Honduras. So I lived the immigrant story. And I grew up in a 4-story rent-controlled walk-up, 5 people, 2 bedrooms, and a fire escape. And so for me, the world was the world of family, of central Brooklyn, church, and work was always something that was emphasized. So, I started out with the same dreams a lot of young people start out with. I thought at one point, well, maybe I'll be a baseball player, maybe I'll be a scientist. And the great thing is that at that time, in New York was such a lively place for me growing up. And my mother was an activist, so I got exposed to a lot of the potential and people fighting for things that they need. And so that sense of justice was so important. My dad and his uncle started a church that's still around, Premier Baptist Church in Brooklyn. So that was one of the first things they did. They held church initially in the apartments where we lived. It would rotate, and then they got a storefront, and now they have a building. And then my mom, who would get a PhD ultimately, was an activist, went to Medgar Evers College. So, through the lens of a Caribbean woman here advocating for change in the community and then working for the city, for the Administration for Children's Services, I kind of got the bug that I wanted to be in a career that would help me to help other people like me and people maybe who didn't have what I had and stuff. So I was blessed. I had 2 working parents, loving parents, brother and sister, a family and a community that provided me with opportunities. So I always see what I'm doing as really giving back to that. So I still live in Brooklyn. I raised my kids here, my wife and I. It's home, and this city is home, and I care a lot about this city. And stuff. So, yeah, if you had told me I would be the executive vice president of a national nonprofit, I probably would have laughed at 20 years old.
Sure.
But now it all makes sense.
It's all come together.
Yeah.
A couple of follow-ups on this. The Crown Heights you grew up in versus the Crown Heights now. How has it changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. Crown Heights.
And you're a Bed-Stuy guy now. Right?
I'm a Bed-Stuy guy now. Although, in central Brooklyn, it all kind of melds together, right? Crown Heights is an interesting community, right? It has folks from the Caribbean diaspora, folks from Africa, folks from the South of America, African Americans who migrated from the South, all came to this place. And there is a large community of Hasidic Jewish people, and so these were all my neighbors. And like a lot of the city, it reflected what was really great about humanity and sometimes what was not so great. I lived through the era of heroin, crack, and what that did to communities of color. But I also saw great resiliency in these communities, great faith and a desire to work to make things better. As a kid, my parents made me available to elderly neighbors for errands.
Really?
Now, that may sound like, oh, that's very noble. It wasn't. As a kid, I want to go out and play. I did my homework. I don't, but when someone knocked on that door, God help me if I didn't do what they were asking. And you usually get a dollar.
You get a little tip.
Yeah, a little
that,
tip.
Right?
And but it taught me a valuable lesson early on. This idea of kind of service to others, like to be in service, and that's not just something you do professionally. That's something you do, in your life. So the Crown Heights back then was a place with a lot of challenges, but also a lot of love, a lot of talent, a lot of capacity. I think the Crown Heights today is different, right? Rents are much higher.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A rent-controlled apartment is very difficult to come by for most families.
Yeah.
I think the neighborhoods become much more diverse in the sense that higher income people more people who are white are moving into the community. You know,
There's
this is a New York
gentrification
story. You know,
conversation,
the G word,
the G word, the gentrification. Bed-Stuy as well.
Same
Very,
thing. My block is very different than what it was when I moved in 2001. Very different. And with that said, though, it's a New York story. You know, it's a story of change. It's a story of community. So people figuring out how to live and work together. It is still a story of inequality. It is still a story of racial injustice, disparate treatment. That story still exists as well. But the potential for us in New York to work on these problems is unlike most places, anywhere else in the country, I would say, you know, in New York. We have the ability to really tackle these problems, take them on. I think that's why I do the work that I do.
Lessons learned from your mother?
There are so many.
I'm sure there are many, many. And by the way, I think it was at the at our conference convening, and we'll talk a little bit about you handed the Opportunity Award to Roderick Jenkins.
Yeah.
Who was a program officer at the New York City at the Trust. And you had said something about I think he said Christopher. Christopher came up. And you were like, I think it's your mother that says that. Is that right? Is that what
it was always like, if I'm in trouble, Christopher. But most other times, Chris, and that's how I knew everything was.
Listen, I'm Greg,
all right.
but I've heard Gregory.
Yes,
I heard Gregory J. I heard Gregory Joseph a few times too. So I know where that's going.
Yes. Yeah, I think the lessons for me that were really important, especially for my mother, was the value of education. In particular, my dad did not have a high school education. He came to this country as a worker. Worked hard, became a warehouse manager. Would get laid off in the early 80s, like his life changed. I watched that too. Yeah. But my mother was very literate, very educated. So the value of education, of learning and being curious, of having humility, and the value of culture, quite frankly. Jamaicans are wonderfully colorful, expressive people. It comes through in the food and the music. My mom used to help to organize some of the events around Labor Day, the Labor Day Parade, the big Labor Day Parade in Brooklyn. And so
the West Indian Day Parade.
The West Indian Labor Day Parade. And so I grew up in this kind of milieu of, there were challenges, but culture and family and community were a way that you could mitigate the bad stuff and stuff. And so the bad stuff was always there. My parents, like a lot of parents, there were financial pressures at times and other struggles. So I got a bird's eye view of that as well. But always felt safe, always felt cared for, and always had a belief that with faith, with good work, hard work, something good could happen in America. And I think that's still something that I believe.
I appreciate you sharing that, and I will say this: as I watched my father, I grew up in two very different places, very different experiences. I have two working parents as well. Growing up, there's a similarity, and I watched my father, and I talked a little bit about this at the conference. I watched him have a job and lose a job and try to find his footing again. And I don't know about you, but I just remember that moment in time as a child observing that and there was something in that moment about a person who's relied upon. Now, again, I have two working parents, so my mother continues in her pathway in terms of nursing, but my father, I saw him go from working to not working.
Yeah.
And having to restart sort of his life and his path. And I just remember thinking, as I look back on that, that was startling. I just assumed everybody worked. Yeah. You, throughout the course, I assume, growing up, you saw working. What happens when someone's not?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a community where a lot of men, particularly black men, often struggled to find meaningful work. And so the ones that did were really looked at with great admiration. I always wanted to be one of those guys. And in many respects, like my dad, my dad would get up every morning, leave the house at 5:30 in the morning, get on a bus to Caldwell, New Jersey at Port Authority, and get home by 7 30, at 7:30 at night. Like that was his life. Saturdays was maybe go to the park, groceries, and then Sundays was church. So, that was his life and stuff. But the dignity that work conveyed to him, I got one summer, the first summer I got, he took me to work at his factory, right? So this is in the early 80s. I mean, I was making, I think, $7.10 an hour. That was a princely sum.
I was going to say, look at that. That's real money right there.
But to get up and leave the house at 5:30 in the summer, when all my friends were playing and planning to hang out and go to the beach and stuff, and then to get home at 7:30, I made really good money that summer. I was so excited. And I'm a Catholic school brat. And my father at the time, he saved the money for me, and I would get a portion of it for expense. So I had money on the weekends and stuff. And then towards the end of the summer, he said, "I'm going to use your money to pay your tuition, and I'm going to give you $400." Again, a lot of money at the time. Yeah. I was livid. I went to my mother. I pleaded my case. It's my money. It's my money. But it taught me a valuable lesson about how important work is, and that you don't just work to make money to spend it frivolously. Like, you have to have priorities and things that are important. And my education is important, and he wanted me to take it seriously. And paying for it made it all the more important to me. Like, I paid.
That's right.
Helped to pay for this and stuff. So wasn't happy at the time, but I think a valuable lesson.
And look where you are now.
I mean, there's a little luck here, I think the time you and I have come up in this city is a very interesting time in the city. I'm always saying I've had a window seat to these incredible changes in New York. I was a child when New York was virtually bankrupt. I know we just had a snowstorm. I know what it's like when sanitation just doesn't come around. Because there ain't anyone to come around. There ain't no money. And stuff. And so watching the city go from that in the late 70s to where we are now, and the political leadership that it took, to get us to where we are, and the leadership of nonprofits and just people in communities organizing. These are very powerful experiences for me. It's why I'm so optimistic about what we can do, because I've seen it done in the worst possible situations.
It's interesting, this idea of sometimes we fixate on what isn't work. I feel like we fixate in two ways sometimes. We fixate on what's not working and tell ourselves, and sometimes maybe tell ourselves it can't be changed, it can't evolve, we can't transform, right? We might fixate on the failure, or we only fixate, and this is something with current elected officials or otherwise, where it's almost like you're only focused on what's great about everything, or what and it's like the reality of New York City or any place you pick is going to be a journey, and the journey is going to have highs and lows attached to it. I mean, this is a city with tremendous amounts of wealth, and at the same time, the neighborhoods that were poor 20, 30, 40 are still to this day. The individuals who are unemployment numbers the gap has only grown in some cases between white and black New Yorkers, for instance. And yet we've made progress in some cases. It's this push and pull that we have to acknowledge. But sometimes I feel like, and I don't know how you feel about this, but it's this sense of, is it okay to say that there's resiliency and there's vulnerability? Is it okay that there's wins and losses?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, in the field that I work, reentry, helping people return from incarceration. I'm always saying, to quote Dickens, is the best of times, it's the worst of times, right? We live in a city here in New York that is a lot safer, not just because of what police have done. It's also because of what communities have done. And that's an underreported story. All the nonprofits, all the local people, the block associations, all the churches that have had prison ministries for years that went in when no one else would. So when I think about mass incarceration, our state was one of the first states in the mid-'70s to lead this nation into the prison building boom and locking up our citizens. New York's prison population peaked in 1999-2000 at about over 71,000 people We're now closer to 30.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'd like to see it get down much more.
Yeah.
That's both a success and there's a story there. How did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that we've done, and how is it that the city became primarily much safer than when I grew up?
Yeah.
During the same period that we
That's
have
right.
been de-incarcerating. So there's a story there to understand that story, and I think that story involves many of the organizations that for years have advocated for that. I'm the Center for Employment Opportunities. Our focus is on employment, getting people leaving incarceration employed. Other colleague organizations like the Fortune Society, more of a focus on housing. The Osborne Association, others, but those groups came together over 30 years ago to form a coalition, the ATI Reentry Coalition, to advocate for resources and policies that would assist that. And so we now have we've had for years now a line item in the city budget devoted to alternatives to incarceration and reentry. And we've advocated for money in the state budget now. The first big investment the last couple of years. So the money is starting to get out the door, but super important that communities come together, nonprofits come together, we work together. Even though we may compete for funding, and we saw common cause together. And that is a theme that I've seen in New York and other places that I go, when people decide to come together to work for what is good and right and impactful. That's the secret sauce, I think, of America.
I lucked into watching a video recently that was put together by Business Insider, and it was about inside Rikers Island's jail kitchen. And it's a 20-minute video about the ins and outs of what it is in that kitchen and how it is that the persons who are incarcerated, the roles that they can have in that kitchen, and folks who are outside of the system coming in and working in that kitchen. It was a story, everything from Bloomberg, when he came into office, he said, we're going to cut salt out of all the food that folks can have in that space, to a story of how it is that you maintain safety and security in that environment, to individuals who are incarcerated who are working right now and what wage they actually make. And the wage they make was $1.45 an hour.
Yeah.
Now, as we pivot to the idea of reentry for individuals who are impacted by the justice system, moving out of incarceration, I recall back in when I started in this job in 22 into 23, the city was talking about reducing access to reentry services, cutting funding. And I remember saying, if I understand all the data correctly, if I understand all of how it is that this is supposed to work, we should be doing everything we can to ensure that folks can land and succeed.
Absolutely.
And then I watched that video and I thought to myself, we know how important it is to live. I'm making first off, $1.45 an hour compared to what the state's minimum wage is $17 an hour. There's a discussion as to why that number is chosen for a variety of reasons. But it's this idea of like, what does reentry look like? What services and supports are available? We know what folks are automatically at a disadvantage when they leave the system, and how it is that they're being embraced, or how they're being supported, or how they're being penalized, and what happens when someone is pursuing job opportunities. But if I get money in my pocket, how do I find my footing? So tell me how it is that you and your organization thinks about this. How do we make not just how do we make it possible for folks to find success? How do we sustain that success?
Yeah.
And how do we push up against some of the things you've already talked about, which is there still is a sense of who it is that is incarcerated, and what does mass incarceration look like, and how it is that we think about safety. Because while the numbers may not justify the need for the justice system to work the way it does work the way it does. And that system has disproportionately harmed people of color, in particular black men.
Yeah. I always like to start with the challenge, right? Mass incarceration is a policy problem. It's a political problem. It's not a behavior problem. It's not that people are committing more crimes. It's that policymakers decided to embark on this approach to locking people up. So we have created the problem. The frequent intervention of the carceral state in the lives of poor people, black and brown people in this city and in this country has distorted their life opportunities, distorted their decisions, it's distorted the institutions, whether it's from marriage to schools. It has changed the very fabric of communities. And to what end? We get very little from this. There's no increased safety as a result of it. It has been a big experiment, and it has failed, and it continues to fail. And so realizing that, what at the Center for Employment Opportunities, what we're focusing on, how do you help people get employment and careers that then can translate into economic mobility. So we have a 4-phase model. You come in CEO. We make sure you can work legally in the country. That's a big part of it, help people get their IDs, get it together. And then you start working for us right away. And we pay you, and we pay you every day. So we're putting money in your pocket. We're giving you job skills. And then each week you're meeting with your job coach to work to remove barriers. And then when you are what we call job start ready, like I've got a resume, we've seen you work for us. We know you can show up on time, do the essential things that employers ask for. Then you start working to find a job with one of our business account managers. And either that's a relationship we have, or you can go out and look for jobs yourself. Once you get employed, we stick with you for up to a year with reentry services. That model has proven to work in very high-quality research to reduce recidivism for the highest risk people. These are the people most likely to return to prison by about 23%. I mean, that's huge. In my field, if you get a 5% difference in recidivism, that's huge. You're saving literally millions of dollars, millions of lives. But it's not enough to just get people a job. What we're thinking is, well, how do you get people into thriving wage careers? First job, better job. And so that is where our mobility efforts, getting people access to credentials, and then giving them financial support so they can actually spend the time doing that. Because you can't say to someone, come out of prison, we want you to go and take this, commercial driver's license training, but you're not going to earn any money while you that is not. So we need people to be stable when they come home, to have access to training and development that then propels them forward in their chosen career, what they want to do. So providing those supports, super important for folks.
Is part of the theory, the movement now, which somewhat paused or on delay with closing Rikers to talk about a borough-based jail system? Is that, in your mind, to some degree, about how it is that community can support individuals?
I think, as I said before about like mass incarceration, we continue to be addicted as a nation to a sense of what should be happening to certain people in our criminal legal system. We have to change that view and have a bigger ideal of justice. Justice was always a community-based effort in this country. Many problems happen in communities that get solved without the inclusion of the formal justice system. This is where mediation and conflict resolution come into play, restorative justice. So most things can and should be resolved in communities. I think, where the justice system does get involved, we need to train that system to work with communities and to work with victims and to work with people who are getting in trouble, to see that as a moment in time and to figure out like what is the measure of justice then. For someone, someone who's a drug addict who breaks into someone's car, there's a victim. Someone's car got broken into. But what is justice should be treatment for that person, getting that person clean, getting that person stable. Prison is not going to solve that person's problem unless you make prison or jail therapeutic, and very few facilities do that. Same thing on workforce. You're not going to solve poverty by arresting someone who steals Pampers from a drugstore. So we have to figure out, like, what is the right measure of justice, and then how do we do the right things? And there you need good data. This is where I think the nonprofit community has done a lot to really advance better policies and practices and programs. And then you have to advocate for policies. You have to change the demand side. You have to shift the thinking. Again, employers think people who have a felony conviction are riskier than anyone else they can hire. So they don't hire these people even though their businesses need the help. And so we have to change that mindset and change the policies and incentives in the system that have been built up for over 50 years that say, yeah, when someone is, comes out, they paid their debt to society, we should keep punishing them. That's essentially what many people who come through our doors are experiencing.
Are you feeling encouraged about our new administration?
I'm always very careful, with political leaders. I think our politics is broken broadly. And I think there are inspirational people that come along every now and then. We lost Jesse Jackson, who passed away recently. He inspired me to be more aware, get in politics. David Dinkins, the first black mayor of New York, was the first campaign I'd ever volunteered for. I did phone banks, the U of T phone bank for that. So, yes, I think I'm excited that the new mayor is inspiring and is talking, I think, about the right things, affordability, making sure transportation is, fast and free, to use his word, but just making sure it works well would be awesome. And I think childcare, which is a big barrier for a lot of particularly low-income people, the ability to have access to affordable childcare. So those three things are great pillars for the city. I'd like to see him talk more about workforce because, it's not just make things cheaper. It's also get people to have better jobs and better income so that they can support their families and stuff. And this city has a lot of tools at our disposal. You and I are part of an awesome nonprofit community and the New York City Employment Training Coalition. But we have CUNY, we have SUNY. We have, I think, a lot of committed employers that also want to see the city succeed. So I appreciate the mayor's focus on a positive vision for the future. There are going to be a lot of detractors and people who are going to politically not like him and maybe not want him to succeed. I think we have to rise above our politics and focus on what's right for New Yorkers, what's right for human beings, what's the right thing to do. It goes back to the things my mother taught me, and is that, what is the right thing to do? And how do you know that thing is the right thing to do? Well, you know it from the data. You know it in your heart often. And you know it when people are willing to work together to achieve it and stuff. So, we should be working to make sure the administration is successful and hold them to account that they do the things that they promise to do.
Speaking of the new administration, they made when this pod drops, we will be somewhat removed from the great blizzard of 2026.
Yeah.
I know on my street, as I was looking around, there was a lot of snow. Still remains a lot of snow. This is perfect snowball weather, by the way. I don't know if the snow was just right yesterday. Perfect. I am an upstate guy, and it's perfect snowball weather. But the reason I bring it up is because I saw the city put out the call for folks to help with shoveling, paid jobs to do some shoveling. And I remember you and I spoke earlier this week about, we're workforce development folks. I bet we have a lot of relationships with people who would love those particular opportunities. There's nothing wrong with someone coming up and saying, hey, New York City, these jobs are available. But I have to say, this relates to the current administration, do they know that we're here because we have relationships with folks who could benefit from these opportunities, but also maybe ready for these opportunities and to take advantage of these opportunities?
Yeah. No, I like you. I walk around. I live in the city. I walk around. I see needs. I see stuff, and so you have a big snowstorm. You see needs. My own community. Shoveling my front, but also helping neighbors shovel theirs, and people kind of sharing like that. that's that's the New York spirit. And so I appreciate the mayor like calling people to do that. That said, certainly at my organization, we have often referred people to those shoveling jobs.
Yeah.
We have often been curious as why the capacity of our organization hasn't been tapped to be helpful. Right. We already do work with the city. We already shovel, as part of our normal work with the city. But that capacity could have been increased, could have been, utilized also for this storm in very targeted ways. My advice to the Department of Sanitation and to the administration in the future is, hey, you have all these workforce organizations, you have all these folks. It would be great to kind of rally us and stuff, but in part because we often do respond. We responded during Sandy to the challenges that our city faced. Our crews went out to Far Rockaway, helped to do clean out and stuff. During COVID, we responded when they needed to get people off Rikers and into hotels. We helped those hotels. I had a colleague who worked to organize meals. We really worked to take care of people, get them access to jobs and to programs. We stood up the largest cash assistance program for justice impacted people during the pandemic because they were not eligible for any of the assistance and were essentially being turned out, or if they were working and lost their jobs, they weren't eligible for a lot of the assistance that was being offered. So the creativity and the desire of nonprofits to want to help in a crisis is there. And I think it's really up to government to call us, to pick up the phone and tell us how, and let us know how we can help.
As we wind down here, I'm curious, what do you think gets in the way? In other words, and this goes back to an earlier comment, the difference between program and policy and, what is it? You're in a space where you have to think about and represent key, critical, thoughtful, dynamic programs, meeting the needs of individuals who are strong, powerful, resilient, vulnerable. You're thinking about this not solely from the perspective of getting someone a job, but you're thinking about career development and economic mobility, which is not about a wage. It's about building wealth over the course of time, which is critical to trying to figure out affordability challenges. It's critical to building future pathways. I'm curious. That, to me, is you're representing a program that's focused on that from a policy advocacy perspective. You're championing that. As an organization, as an individual, thinking about what reentry should look like successfully over the course of time. Why is it that things don't move the way that we want or we think would be the right ways to move?
Yeah, I think to quote Frederick Douglass, like power concedes nothing without demand, right? I think for too often, even those of us in the work, have been willing to just do what it takes to get by and stuff, and not to think, how can we go bigger? How can we have a bigger impact? So I gave the example of the returning citizen stimulus during the pandemic. We handed out financial assistance to 10,500 people across the country, including hundreds here in New York City and more upstate New York. What did we learn from that? Giving people financial assistance and connecting them to services has shown to help people. It reduced recidivism, right? So reduce parole violations. People did smart things with the money. Some people saved money. People did things for their family. There's one guy who paid for his mother's funeral during the pandemic. People didn't think in his family that he had anything to offer. So the assistance, the financial assistance, offers dignity. But more importantly, it gave people the breathing room to decide, I can make choices in my life. So right now in New York State, we have a bill that's sponsored by Senator Jeremy Cooney and Assemblymember Edward Gibbs called the Reentry Assistance Bill. And the idea would be we spend tens of thousands of dollars incarcerating people, hundreds of thousands, over $500,000 on Rikers. What if we gave people some financial assistance when they came out to bridge them over. So this bill would focus on people recently released from prison in New York State, incarcerated for a minimum of 6 months. And there's no application required, right? The idea would be get them the financial assistance and help them get connected to services. Give them that breathing room. Put some money in their pocket. And this stems, our model is, we've been doing transitional work for years, and the evidence in our program shows it works to give people immediate access to financial supports and high-quality reentry programming. That doesn't always happen. Reentry is the last mile of justice reform. It's filled with potholes. There's no dedicated national reentry funding. But we figured out how to do this and do this at scale, how to help people coming out of incarceration, now in 30 cities across 12 states. We want to see these policies adopted so that you can scale even further the benefits to people who are coming home. There's no reason someone should come out of prison or jail without the resources and support they need to never have to go back. Treatment, housing, support with their family, and a job and career. Those things are essential to stabilizing someone. And we can do it. It'll cost less. It'll be more effective than what we already do.
I thank you for your insight, Chris. You are a leader and a champion in this particular work. And as you're talking, I just keep thinking back to that Inside Rikers Island Jail Kitchen Business Insider video. The person incarcerated who is at this moment working in the kitchen, who only wants to go back to opening their own restaurant in their community because they love to feed people, making $1.45 an hour right now.
Yeah.
Going to at some point leave that system. Now, all I can think about is where is the rehabilitation, the restoration, the resource building that gets you to a place where you can then transition. To your point, how is it that using our legislative powers, how we're giving people the cushion and support or the launch pad, right, at the same time as the programs are resourced to support and encourage, to the employer willingness to bring someone back, to the building opportunity that can lead to entrepreneurship and beyond. It's an investment that is a critical one, and as you pointed out, at the end of the day, that one is going to save us a lot of money if we do that right, as opposed to plugging a lot of dollars into a system that has disproportionately affected a whole group of people, has been completely wrong-headed along the path, and is not resulting in any good that I think we understand can be possible. And certainly that kitchen worker would benefit from.
Yeah. What if our vision for justice was communities free of crime, of violent crime, communities where people could make choices for themselves and have the opportunities, and families could remain intact, and people who had maybe problems or challenges, whether it's substance abuse or they need housing or they're struggling to find a job, got the support that they needed. What if we had a world like that, and a city like that, where that was the default? Those are the things that people had, and all around us, people could experience joy. And kids could grow up in a community that felt inspiring, where they felt loved. And the justice system is a lot smaller than it is now. We don't need as many police and prosecutors. And instead, we invest in schools, and we invest in youth programs, and we invest in things that really support families. And we keep people's taxes lower because we're not paying the tax that it costs to run the mass incarceration apparatus. What if that we had a vision of a city and a life that is that and stuff. And that vision is for everyone, not just the well-to-do, not just the people with a lot of money who can wall themselves off, but every New Yorker could experience this city. And I would submit to you, Greg, that we do live in a time that is very different than the city I grew up in. My kids can go anywhere in the city any hour of the night with their headphones on their head, and so they don't have to do what I had to do as a kid, and they don't have to put their money in their sock.
Right.
They don't have to remove their jewelry. Right. They don't have to be on high surveillance. That's the New York I grew up in, and stuff. So we should recognize the success that we had, but also recognize that the success we've had is not enough. And certainly when it comes to crime policy, our carceral state, there's so much more that we could do. And if we do these things now, this is my goal, to be able to someday tell the story to grandchildren, maybe great-grandchildren, that, we have this problem, mass incarceration, and we fixed it.
Chris, I thank you for your time as who you are and what you do and how you think, the leadership you bring to this particular sector, to our board. I'm genuinely grateful, and I would be remiss if I didn't say two final things. Number one, we need to make a follow-up time, because we need to talk about a report that came out, Locked Out of the Labor Market, a new state-level measure of incarceration and inequality. This is a critical report that we all need to spend some time thinking about. It's analysis by the Vera Institute of Justice. The omission of incarcerated people from official employment statistics creates a false impression of economic well-being and racial equity.
Yeah.
We need to dig into this, because the numbers related to unemployment, especially for black men, is 3 times as high when you start talking about this data. And that's something we have to dig into.
And this is the reality that people live in our city.
That's right.
Every person that's counted in that report has a family member, many people have minor children. That is a reality in many of our communities. So don't let the glitz and the glamour of New York, and even the progress that we've made, there's still a lot of work to do, and that report highlights.
That's right.
That
And tell the real story of what the data really is.
Yeah.
Unpack the data to get to the actual numbers. And the last thing I want to say to you is, one of the best moments of the past part of the year, I mean, it's a joy and an honor to be part of this work in many different ways. Every now and then someone peels back the layers and we're just people. And one of my favorite moments of the year, I think it was right around Thanksgiving, you and I were on a call together, checking in before the holiday, and you were saying something. You were in your, like, I don't want to say like zen. You were in the most peaceful space. Like, what are you doing? Like, I'm cooking. I'm just cooking. And you literally like named like a dozen things. I'm like, what are you working on over there? And you had like a dozen things, and I could not. You are a joyful, thoughtful, inspiring individual, but you seem so at peace in that particular moment, and I appreciated you sharing that. What were you making? I just remember you like running down a list.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I cooked Thanksgiving from scratch.
From scratch,
so everything. For me, it's like a form of meditation.
There it is.
I put on some jazz or old soul music. People leave me alone in my house, so it's also like I just get that domain.
Right. Dad's doing this.
Yeah,
I gotta let.
yeah. But let's see. The thing that was a little different that I did make was a vegan cheesecake. So I'd never made cheesecake before. So, but it's a rum cheesecake.
Oh.
So I have to say, I haven't perfected the crust yet, but it's graham crackers. I got to, I'm actually planning to do another one maybe for Easter.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah, so I'll practice. I'll do a lot of practice. Yeah.
We'll have a board meeting right around that time.
That's right.
I so greatly appreciate our time. I have a great deal of admiration and respect for your work, your life story, the path ahead, and I look forward to continuing to chip it away at all of the different things that you and I think agree need to be very different about New York. Let's make that new New York.
Absolutely, brother. Good to be here with you.
It's an honor. Thank you.